May we have your attention, please? Welcome. We ask that you silence all cell phones, pagers, and other electronic devices. Flash photography and unauthorized recording is prohibited. Please take a moment to identify the nearest exit. In addition to the 6 regular exits, there are 2 emergency exits at the back of the mezzanine and balcony levels. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan L. Walton, the Plummer Professor of Christian Morals and Pusey Minister in the Memorial Church of Harvard University. And on behalf of President Larry Bacow, Mr. Glenn Hutchins, and Professor Henry Louis Gates, it is my honor this afternoon to welcome the 2018 Du Bois medalists. Come on, show your love. My friends, being the pious man that he is, Professor Gates has asked me to open this evening with a prayer. And I would like to do so by appealing to a collective spirit of excellence in the arts, education, and all fields of human endeavor that we're here to celebrate this afternoon by reciting the words of William Edward Burghardt Du Bois himself, a prayer that can be found in his collections, Prayers for Dark People. Let us assume a posture of prayer, meditation, and/or reflection. We ask you to bless all schools and forward the great work of education for which we all stand, O God. Arouse within us and within our land a deep realization of the seriousness of our task. Give us the grace to realize that education is not simply doing the things we like, studying the tasks that appeal to us, or wandering around in a world of thought, but rather, education is the unpleasant task, the hard lesson and the bitter experience that often leads to knowledge and power and good. Help us to realize how heavy is our responsibility and how great the cost that we must pay. For the school of today is the world of tomorrow. So help us to seek thy truth, as it's the truth that will set us free. May we all say together, amen. Amen. Skip, Chief. It's on you now. Kumba. Please receive the Kumba Singers of Harvard University.
Give it up for the Kumba Singers. Give it up one more time for the Kumba Singers, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, my name is Henry Louis Gates Jr. And it gives me an enormous amount of pleasure on behalf of Harvard's new president, Lawrence S. Bacow. Give it up for the brother right here. And the chairman of the board of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, Glenn H. Hutchins. On whose behalf I welcome you to the 6th annual Hutchins Center Honors. Now this year, what brings together the people that we're honoring on this stage, perhaps more than ever, is the commitment to protect diversity, inclusion, equal rights, civil rights, and human rights no matter what. And no one is in the fight for these values more deeply than Harvard's 29th president, inaugurated just this past Friday, Lawrence S. Bacow. Larry Bacow, like his predecessor, our outstanding president, Drew Gilpin-Faust. Give it up for Drew. Larry is steadfast in his commitment to our university's cardinal virtues. And what are they? Freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and diversity with excellence in the selection of our students, our faculty, and our administrators. In fact, in his letter to the Harvard community, published just yesterday, President Bacow reminded us of what makes Harvard a university that embodies a rare combination of reverence for tradition while simultaneously nurturing the ground for the boldest forms of innovation. And this is what he wrote. Every day on our campus provides countless opportunities to learn, both from the vast intellectual resources at our disposal, and from those we encounter who make this community special. We have and will continue to embrace and celebrate diversity in every possible dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, this country needs to hear those words. Give it up for Larry Bacow. And the person who makes this grand annual event possible, whose foresight, whose intelligence, whose engagement, and most of all, whose generosity empower the work we do here every day, who along with his brilliant wife, my friend Debbie Hutchins, has given more generously, think about this, to the field of African and African American study than anyone else in the history of our field at any time or any place. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for my friend Glenn H. Hutchins. For as much as we have to celebrate, for as blessed as each of us is to be fortunate enough to experience the freedom of thought and independence of mind so cherished and valued by our university, our society, to be honest, faces difficult times. When we recall the dramatic progress we've made in the history of this country's struggle for civil rights, it's tempting to remember only our long arc of progress, and even to assume the continuation of that progress to be inevitable. But ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves today at a new nadir in our country's race relations, somewhat akin to the period following Reconstruction after the Civil War, when the blessings of freedom proffered by emancipation were brutally, intentionally, and systematically chipped away, leaving in their wake injustice, disenfranchisement, the convict lease system, a seemingly endless cycle of poverty for so many of the freedmen and the freedwomen trapped in the misery of sharecropping, and the institutionalization of separate but equal, so-called, as the law of the land. Now, I don't want to take time away from the achievements of our brilliant honorees this afternoon by cataloging the systemic and structural abuses that we see today in the long backlash to the civil rights movement and, to be honest, to the tenure in the White House of the first Black American president. While the march toward gender and racial equality and the embrace of cultural diversity has achieved so much, which we must applaud, which we must celebrate, to some of our fellow citizens, these same realizations of the potential of American democracy have been threatening, challenging the way things had always been. Now, not only have we far to go, but even the distance we've traveled is under siege. These new tribalist developments, which take strength from too familiar narratives of domination and entitlement, are for many of us exhausting and overwhelming. We want to turn CNN off. We want to silence our cell phones. We want to close our eyes. But among us, there are those who draw on the long history of struggle to fight the powers that be. Activists fighting historic injustices, educators raising up a new generation of leaders, artists speaking truth to power through visual media and comedic genius, corporate leaders and philanthropists directing profits and wealth to social betterment, and even professional athletes giving up their careers for an irrefutably just cause. In drawing strength from these heroes among us, let us also find resolve in the words of the scholar and activist whose life inspires this occasion, W.E.B. Du Bois. As the editor of the NAACP's flagship magazine, The Crisis, Du Bois exhorted his generation as he exhorts us now, and I quote, "Agitation is a necessary evil to tell of the ills of the suffering. Without it, many a nation has been lulled to false security and preened itself with virtues it did not possess. Our function is to tell this nation the crying evil of race prejudice. It is a hard duty, but it is a necessary duty, a divine duty." In 1895, Du Bois became, of course, the first African American to earn a PhD at Harvard, whose motto is Veritas, or truth. And I must say, for our generation, Harvard has become, to my delight, a key point of resistance against the forces that want to undo all of the progress we've made over the last half century. Consider the extraordinary transformation in the role of women and people of color at this university over just the last 2 decades. Changes that would have absolutely astonished W.E.B. Du Bois. To name just a few, the magnificent service of our first female president, her appointment of 3 stellar Black female deans of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. The recent appointment by President Bacow of our extraordinarily talented colleague, Professor Claudine Gay, as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Her appointment of the brilliant W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of the Social Sciences, my friend Lawrence Douglas Bobo, as Dean of the Social Sciences. We have a faculty that is more various than at any point in Harvard's history, and a dazzling student body that is more racially and socioeconomically diverse than ever before. With the university's leadership expressing the firmest of commitments to diversity and to ensuring that we foster an environment in which all students, faculty, and visitors feel a true sense of belonging. The new truth of Harvard is its deep and unshakable commitment to excellence in whatever forms excellence might assume. And from that commitment, ladies and gentlemen, we shall never, never waver. Make no mistake about it, we as a university have made tremendous progress over the last half century. Individuals can make a difference. To take just one example, Harvard, like hundreds of other colleges, responded to Dr. King's assassination in April 1968 by seeking to increase its number of students of color. The dean of admissions at the time, a man named Chase Peterson, hired a black man, John Harwell, the first African-American employed by the admissions office, recruited from a counseling job in Chicago in the fall of 1968. Then Chase recruited a guy named David Evans. David Evans, who had a master's degree in chemical engineering from Princeton and who was working as an engineer with IBM in Huntsville, Alabama on the Saturn Apollo project during the fall and winter of 1969 and 1970. Dave took what he intended to be a short leave of absence from IBM to help Harvard recruit black students. The last time I checked, Dave was still on leave. Working under the leadership of William Fitzsimmons, Dave and his colleagues began expanding the university's search incrementally, student by student, for what we might think of as splendid inquisitiveness in uncommon forms. The result, since then, the admission of no less than 5,500 undergraduate students of color, all since Dave Evans decided to sacrifice his chosen profession and help Bill Fitzsimmons and their colleagues in the admission office help Harvard to broaden the intellectual complexion of our student body. And let's not forget another transformation just as remarkable. From a ratio of 4-to-1 women to men in 1970 to a slight majority of female undergraduates in the college today. We must never underestimate the power of one individual to make a difference. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our colleague, David Evans, who will soon celebrate his 50th anniversary working in the Harvard College Admissions Office. Now, I emailed Dave this morning and told him that we were going to give it up for him. He emailed me, said he couldn't be here because he was out in the hinterlands scouring around trying to find more black people to get admitted in the Harvard. Before I make way for my friend Glenn Hutchins, before we celebrate the achievements of these 8 remarkable individuals, by the way, Bryan Stevenson is coming, his plane was delayed because of the weather, but he's in the air and he'll be here. Before we celebrate the achievements of these 8 remarkable individuals assembled on this stage this afternoon, each who has also made such a profound difference in our world, let me cite these wise words of Dr. King. I refuse to accept despair as the final response to the ambiguities of history. I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes him morally incapable of reaching up for the eternal oughtness that forever confronts him. I refuse to accept the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in the river of life. unable to influence the unfolding events which surround him. I refuse to accept that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war, and I'm sure today that Dr. King would have added sexism, homophobia, and xenophobia, that the bright daybreak of peace, he continued, and brotherhood can never become a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, in refusing to accept the low bar of hate, injustice, and division, Dr. King resolved to dedicate his life to bending the arc of the moral universe toward justice. Now, in this sometimes trying, sometimes troubling moment, we must join hands across our differences of ethnicity, religious belief, gender, sexual preference, nationality, and class to bend that arc back toward the ideal of justice that some are trying to wrest from our grasp. Ceremonies like this one remind us of the leaders in our midst who do this on a daily basis, not because it's easy, not because it's popular, not for profit, but precisely because they now know that the moment has come to do the hard work of standing tall, agitating, effecting change, and never, never turning back. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for the 2018 recipients of the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal, and welcome my friend Glenn Hutchins.
Thank you, Skip. Not bad this year, huh? Good job. We have a bunch of people to thank here today, so I want to start by doing that. First, we have all the presenters and readers who are gathered here on the front row. Thank you very much for making the effort to be with us today. The guy who I affectionately call President Larry, I hope you will come back here many, many times over the years. You have an invitation every year. We have the members of our National Advisory Board who serve us as guidance for this organization, who also help to pay the bills. So we'd like to thank each of them in turn. I'll ask them to stand up, wave their hand, hold your applause till the end. I can see Bennett Ashley. Are you down there? Bennett, keep standing. Ken Chenault, doing a twofer here today. Ken, stand up, come on. Richard Cohen, where are you, Richard? Vergis Colbert, were you in the house, Vergis? It's a little dark out there, I can't see everybody. Steve Cousins, Jeremy Henderson, I know you're here. Sarah Manyinka, Damon Martin, Henry McGee, and Candace King-Weir. Thank you very much for your support for the organization, guys. Next is a group of young but very tall men who have come to almost every single one of these events. I think they've been to everyone, haven't they, Skip? Everyone. The Harvard men's basketball team led by Coach Amaker. Where are you guys? Are you out there somewhere? We saw you earlier. There we go. Yeah. These guys have won. They've won under Tommy Amaker 6, not that exact group actually because they do graduate, but won 6 of the last 8 Ivy League regular season championships. Last year you guys promised us number 6, right? You promised us right here you'd win number 6, and you delivered. So now in Harvard fashion, since you've raised our expectations, we expect you back here next year with number 7, okay? All right? Speaking of championships, we have a guest of mine tonight who we expect great things from in Boston in the near future, Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics. Where are you, Jaylen? Jaylen, I think I need another one of these rings. What do you think? Okay. I also want to welcome the many Harvard students who won 2 lotteries to be here tonight. The first was you had to be admitted to Harvard to begin with. And then you had to win a ticket to get to this event. Now, which do you think was harder to do? Skip and I strongly believe that we do this for you. It's great to have you here. Thank you for coming. We're also delighted to welcome students and teachers from schools all around Boston and Cambridge. When I call out your school's name, let's hear from you, okay? The Boston Arts Academy, the Boston College High School, Boston Latin School. There you go, all right. Let's see if Boston University Academy can do better than that. Jeremiah Burke High School, Cambridge Ringen Latin. All right. Cambridge Street Upper School, Community Academy, Community Charter School of Cambridge, the Fessenden School, the Henderson, there you go, Henderson Inclusion School, Madison Park Vocational High School, Josiah Quincy Upper School, the Urban Science Academy. There you go. Well done. The Windsor School, the Workforce Program of the Cambridge Housing Authority. There you go. And of course, the students of the Du Bois Society. Now, I recommend you mention this event in your college essays. It won't hurt. Finally, I would like to welcome the family members of one of our most memorable and revered Du Bois medalists. The family of Muhammad Ali is here with us this evening. Please welcome the champ's daughter, Kalia Art Ali Wertheimer, and his grandson, Jacob, who's a sophomore right here at Harvard. Where are you guys? Okay. Now, let's get this show on the road. You ready to start? It's my role and honor to begin tonight's program by introducing one of the great artists of our time, Kehinde Wiley. Just wait, you'll hear what you're going to hear after you get your introduction. During my remarks, we hope to put a selection of Kehinde's images from his remarkable body of work. There we go. Those of you who were here last year, this was one of our honorees last year. So please look at that visual feast while I speak. Kehinde's work applies the visual vocabulary and historical conventions of wealth and prestige to subjects drawn from the urban fabric, creating a stunning synthesis which represents a wholly new genre of portrait painting. He borrows the classical form of portraits by European masters such as Reynolds, Gainsborough, Titian, and Ingres, which are familiar to any student here who has gone to the Fogg Art Museum. But into that frame he inserts, and I quote, urban, black, and brown men and women found throughout the world. He creates images which are, quote, juxtaposed inversions of each other, as an example, forcing ambiguity, provocation, and perplexity. As one writer put it, Kehinde's work, quote, inserts black males into a painting tradition that has typically omitted them or relegated them to peripheral positions. At the same time, he critiques contemporary portrayals of black masculinity itself, unquote. Behind most successful men and women is a loving mother. Kehinde, who grew up in South Central LA, was, oh, you got some fans here of South Central, huh? Was introduced to classical painting when his mother enrolled him in weekend art classes, which took him to museums such as the Huntington Art Gallery, which is one of my favorites, whose collection of British 18th and 19th century portraiture gave him an early familiarity with the genre. He became, quote, keenly aware of the signifiers of power, the implications of the traditional portrait, which are about privilege, power, elitism. He was looking at a world that he was not included in. While studying at the San Francisco Art Museum at Yale, really? Okay. That's all right. And later, painting in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem, he would stop young African-American men on the street to ask them if they wished to pose for a portrait, and allowing them to select the masterwork they would be pictured in. From those chance encounters on the street, plus the flash of the genius from his paintbrush, works of art for the ages were born. To quote my dear friend Thelma Golden from Harlem Studio Museum, Kehinde, quote, has become one of the most important artists of the moment, who's with work as relevant and resonant to the hip-hop generation as it is to high-end collectors and major museums. Another friend of mine that you might recognize, do we have his portrait up here? Chose Kehinde to paint his official portrait, which was unveiled last year. President Obama chose Kehinde because his work has the capacity to elevate ordinary people to the level of royalty. The president, by the way, who sends his regards and congratulations to you, Kehinde, today, says Kehinde lifted them up and gave them a platform and said they belong at the center of American life. There was something that moved me deeply. That's part of what I believe politics should be about. Not simply celebrating the high and mighty and expecting that the country unfolds from the top down, but rather that it comes from the bottom up. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure today to present the Du Bois Medal to Kehinde Wiley. Kehinde, would you please come join us at the podium?
This is an honor, obviously, beyond anything that I can measure, and it's an embarrassment of riches. I'd like to thank my family, my mom, my sisters, all of you who are viewers of Goodwill, people who take the time to look at a two-dimensional image and imagine that there can be something told in that. There's something about good faith going on in making pictures. It's about having the trust that there is an audience out there that can understand a thing or two about the world beyond simplifications. I think more than ever, that's where we are today. I'd like to thank Harvard. I'd like to thank you all again. And I am not going to belabor this, but it is phenomenal. God bless.
Wow, this is quite a ceremony, and I would like to actually exercise presidential privilege by thanking Skip and Glenn one more time for making this happen. So it is my pleasure to introduce our next honorand. Last Friday, I had the privilege of being inaugurated as the 29th president of Harvard University. And this picture was taken at my inauguration. Now, many people traveled far and wide to celebrate this occasion with me, but I was especially pleased to be joined by my longtime friend and colleague, and indeed classmate, Ken Chenault. Ken and I met when we were much, much younger at Harvard Law School. And I have to tell you, back then, Harvard Law School was a pretty competitive place. And lots of people tried to impress others, their classmates especially, with how smart they were. Always had their hand up, always wanted to be the first to be called on, always had something to say. Not Ken. Ken never tried to be the smartest person in the room. But as soon as he spoke up, it was clear that he was the wisest. And as I think many of you know, wisdom is actually a much scarcer resource in almost any organization than intellect. Smart he is, but he is also wise. I've learned at least as much from his friendship as I've also learned from his leadership. And I'm applying the lessons from the leadership daily today. Ken is a person of abundant integrity, grit, determination, but also grace. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce him today. Warren Buffett has called Ken a leader's leader, the benchmark he measures others against. In Ken's 37 years at American Express, almost half of them as CEO, the company earned global recognition as a leader in customer service, all while enabling talented individuals from within the organization to grow, learn, and thrive. That work began in the corner office. Ken's really a teacher at heart. He held brown bag lunches with employees around the country and indeed around the world, and it gave him a deeper sense of how work in the organization actually happened and how he could support creativity and innovation on the ground in every corner of the globe where American Express was represented. A quiet mentor for countless men and women, he carefully nurtured aspirations of others, encouraging careful listening as he shared the wisdom of his father, and I quote, "Our performance as individuals is the only thing any of us can control." In 2013, Ken delivered the Wharton Leadership Lecture at the University of Pennsylvania and summarized his much admired and often imitated style. And I'm going to quote him. "I don't believe," he said, "in the imperial CEO. The best organizations create thousands of leaders." The same selflessness is ever present in Ken's work to advance the causes that matter most to him. As chair of the National Museum of African American History and Culture's Advisory Council, he helped to raise more than $300 million to preserve our nation's history. As National Board Chair of Junior Achievement USA, he connected school systems around the country with chapters of the National Black MBA Association to sponsor programs that foster entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and work readiness. These extraordinary acts of generosity exemplify a commitment to making the world a better place that took root during his undergraduate years at Bowdoin College. Like many of us who attended college at the height of the civil rights movement, Ken was inspired, and his words felt that he had to be involved. I'm fortunate, and so is Harvard, that Ken continues to stay involved here as a member of the Harvard Corporation. And as was true when he was in law school, whenever he speaks, everybody knows who the wisest person in the room is. Today, we celebrate a man whose leadership in business and in the larger world has made life richer for all of us. In recognition of his path-breaking contributions in the corporate world and to cultural and educational institutions alike, the Hutchins Center today presents to Ken Chenault the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. Ken, please come up.
I'll do it. You gonna do it? Yeah. Do I get to do it? If you like. You want to do it? Presidential prerogative. Go right ahead. Okay. Come on, I've never gotten to do something like this before.
This is a great honor. I was lucky to be raised by parents who spoke of W.E.B. Du Bois. My father felt privileged that he had the opportunity to hear Dr. Du Bois speak. And literally, almost once a week, we would hear his name. I was greatly influenced by his writings. For my 13th birthday, my father gave me The Souls of Black Folk. And that had an incredible impact on me. So this medal means a great deal to me. I am incredibly proud to be part of this esteemed group. My congratulations to my fellow honorees. Thank you, Larry, for those kind words. Given how long we've known each other, you're certainly overly generous, but I appreciate it. And I will say it once again, we are most fortunate to have Larry Bacow as the 29th president of Harvard University. I also want to thank my good friends, Skip Gates and Glenn Hutchins, for all the great work they do. I strongly believe that if you want to lead, you have to be willing to serve. And I've tried throughout my career to be of service to people to make a meaningful difference in their lives. Leadership is a privilege, and your leadership must be guided by core values and beliefs. No one achieves success on their own, and I stand on the shoulders of so many, past and present, and I am so thankful. I want to give special thanks to my wife, Catherine, and my two sons, Kenneth and Kevin, who are Harvard alums, for their constant love and support. I am humbled by this award.
My name is William Julius Wilson, and I have the distinct honor of reading a brief passage from Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech on Du Bois' centennial 100th birthday, February 23rd, 1968, in Carnegie Hall, New York City, less than 2 months before Dr. King was assassinated. Dr. King stated, Dr. Du Bois was not only an intellectual giant, exploring the frontiers of knowledge, he was, in the first place, a teacher. One idea he insistently taught was that black people have been kept in oppression and deprivation by a poisonous fog of lies that depicted them as inferior, born deficient, and deservedly doomed to servitude to the grave. So assiduously has this poison been injected into the mind of America that its disease has infected not only whites, but many Negroes as well. So long as the lie was believed, the brutality and criminality of conduct toward the Negro was easy for the conscience to bear. The twisted logic ran: if the black man was inferior, he was not oppressed. His place in society was appropriate to his meager talent and intellect. Dr. Du Bois recognized that the keystone in the arc of oppression was a myth of inferiority, and he dedicated his brilliant talents to demolishing this myth. There could scarcely be a more suitable person for such a monumental task. He was himself unsurpassed as an intellect, and he was a Negro. Beyond this, he was passionately proud to be black. Indeed, he not only had genius and pride, but he also had an indomitable fighting spirit. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Alan Garber, Provost of Harvard University, and it's my great pleasure to join in these festivities. And here I have to tip my hat to my classmate, Glenn Hutchins. You did well. On behalf of Class of '77. Perhaps it was a surprise to no one that Florence Ladd, the daughter of two Washington, D.C. educators, that this daughter of two Washington, D.C. educators would become an educator herself. But the scope and scale of her accomplishments in the world of learning are truly remarkable. She has elevated every institution she has been part of, including this one, with her intellectual leadership and generosity. Florence Ladd pursued an education in psychology first at Howard University, from which she graduated, am I allowed to say this? In 1953. Then in France and Switzerland, where she studied psychological testing, and at the University of Rochester, where she earned her PhD in 1958. Her career in higher education has taken her around the world. She has taught at Simmons College, at Harvard, in both the Graduate School of Design and the Graduate School of Education, and the Roberts School and the American College for Girls in Istanbul. She is also a widely respected leader both in higher education and public service. She was Dean of the MIT School of Architecture and then Dean of Students at Wellesley. She eventually served as Associate Director of Oxfam America, acting as liaison to the United Nations and as a consultant to the Institute of International Education's South Africa Education Program. Finally, She became director of the Bunting Institute at Radcliffe College. She did that from 1989 to 1997. And during her tenure at the Bunting Institute, Mirabella magazine named Florence one of 100 fearless women, and it said of her that she nurtures talent before the rest of the world even notices it. Indeed, Florence has a keen eye as an art collector, and she has donated works to the permanent collections of the Harvard Art Museums and Boston's Museum of Fine Arts. She has served as a trustee of the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston and as an overseer of the Museum of Fine Arts. 2 pieces from her collection by the African-American artist Mildred Howard will be featured in an upcoming exhibition at the Hutchins Center's Cooper Gallery. As a trustee, Florence has lent her expertise in higher education to Bentley College and Hampshire College, where she was the chair of the Board of Trustees. A writer of great depth and range, she has written novels, poetry, and nonfiction essays. In 1997, her first novel, Sarah's Psalm, received the Best Fiction Award from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Dividing her time between homes in Cambridge and in Burgundy, France, Florence is worldly and generous, and has worked toward fostering connections between people through education the world over. For her unending dedication to lifting others through education, the Hutchins Center recognizes Florence Ladd with the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal.
A prominent theme in the works of W.E.B. Du Bois is protest. As we look at the honorees today, it's clear that one of the themes in their selection process was protest. The takeaway, or a takeaway from this occasion, must be protest, protest, protest. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Emmanuel Echampon, and I'm the Faculty Director for the Center for African Studies. I am reading an excerpt from an essay by Du Bois entitled Our Own Consent, published in The Crisis, January 1913. Oppression cost the oppressor too much if the oppressed stand up and protest. The protest need not be merely physical, the throwing of stones and bullets. If it is mental and spiritual, if it expresses itself in silent, persistent dissatisfaction, the cost to the oppressor is terrific. If you doubt the efficacy of agitation and protest, ask yourself, why is the reactionary oligarchic South so afraid of even one protesting voice? Is it because they know that when one protesting voice finds its fellows, it may find soon 10 millions? When 10 million voices speak, they must be heard. And when their cause is once heard, its justice will be evident and its triumph sure. Agitate then, brother. Protest, reveal the truth, and refuse to be silenced. The most damnable canker at the heart of America is her treatment of colored folk.
Good evening. I'm Evelyn Hammonds, and I'm here to honor Shirley Ann Jackson. Shirley Ann Jackson arrived at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1964 as the valedictorian of Roosevelt High School in Washington, D.C. As a dedicated and quick studier in problem sets, or P-sets as you call them today, and as one of just a few African-American students. Despite her evident talents, it was that last descriptor that defined a significant part of her experience of MIT as isolating. She was only one of 2 African-American women in her class. Yet she stayed and thrived for 9 years. First to earn her SB in physics, and then to become the first African-American woman to receive a doctorate in any field at MIT. But the best part, everyone, is that her field is theoretical elementary particle physics. That dedication and resilience would eventually carry her through numerous senior leadership positions in academia, government, industry, and research, including her current role as president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She is, in fact, the first African-American woman to lead a top-ranked research university. Dr. Jackson attributes her interest in science, as well as her confidence that she could do it, to 2 events in her youth: the Supreme Court's Brown v. Board decision in 1954, and the successful Russian launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957. Because both of these events revealed opportunities for education and discovery previously unknowable. She has suggested that her earliest engagement with science, from observing bees that she captured in her backyard to her years at MIT, produced in her a love of science and math that she never lost. Her commitment to doing physics at the highest level led her to the pinnacle of American science. Dr. Jackson is also a renowned educator. She told NPR that universities are, quote, part of an overall pipeline that has to do 5 things. And I call it invite, excite, nurture, educate, and launch young people into careers in science and engineering. As president of Rensselaer since 1999, those 5 things have comprised her mandate. Through ambitious strategic efforts known as the Rensselaer Plan and the Rensselaer Plan 2024, she has raised the profile of RPI, as well as considerably more than $1 billion, to make the Institute a leader in areas of research that will drive its progress in the 21st century and beyond, through collaboration across disciplines, sectors, and regions. And no less important has been her commitment to and success in increasing the number of underrepresented minority and women faculty and students at RPI. Her goal of building RPI's global reach and global impact to change the world for the better includes those who have been traditionally left out. Now, Dr. Jackson has received awards too numerous to mention, but highlights include her election as an International Fellow of the British Royal Academy of Engineering, a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Vannevar Bush Award from the National Science Board. She holds 53 honorary degrees and was awarded the National Medal of Science in 2016. She has also held numerous presidential appointments, first under Bill Clinton, who appointed her chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and then under Barack Obama, who appointed her to several advisory councils and boards, including naming her co-chair of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board in 2014. As a graduate student at MIT, following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, she began to organize other Black students to push for the recruitment and retention of more minority students and faculty at MIT as a founding member of the Black Students Union. About this period of Dr. Jackson's own education, the MIT Technology Review stated that, quote, she saw that she was in a position to open the aperture for more minorities and women at the Institute. Her effects bore fruit. In the fall of 1969, only a year later, 57 African-American freshmen entered MIT, a more than tenfold increase over any year. And one of those students was Sylvester James Gates, who's now a theoretical physicist at Brown University, and he said, quote, Dr. Jackson was my first physics teacher at MIT in 1969. She has been a North Star to many colleagues over the years as she modeled exceedingly well something she says, and he said, even smart people have to work very hard to accomplish something great. She is the epitome of this statement in so many diverse areas. I first met Shirley in 1974 at Spelman College when she came to Atlanta on a recruiting trip. I was studying physics and electrical engineering with the goal of earning a PhD in physics. Now, in many respects, this goal was more abstract than concrete. And why is that? Because until I met Shirley, I had never met, known, or even heard of an African-American woman physicist. And many of the male students at Morehouse College, where I took my physics courses, routinely told me that it was impossible to be an African-American woman and a physicist. Now, Shirley's talk to our chapter, the Society of Physics students, was mesmerizing. We watched in awe as she filled the blackboard with complicated equations from her thesis work in theoretical high-energy physics. We listened quietly, deeply moved by her clarity and confidence as she explained her work. But I must also say, and I don't think I've ever told her this, we were also quiet because none of us had ever taken a course in high energy physics or quantum field theory, and we barely understood what she said. But she inspired us nonetheless. And I applied only to the MIT for graduate study in physics because of her. As I have watched her steady climb to the top of American science and higher education, I am still awed by the ways in which she has made the impossible possible for all students in science and engineering, but specifically for African American women, so no one can no longer say you can't be a Black woman and a physicist. For her own singular accomplishments in science, as well as for her tremendous success in bringing others along to opportunities newly open, the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research awards Shirley Ann Jackson the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal.
Well done. Evelyn, don't go. Congratulations. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I am a mild-mannered physicist for the Daily Planet. Now, you have to be of my era to know about the Daily Planet. Having said that, I stand here today because of two key things. One is the one that Dr. Hammonds already has told you, and thank you for that. And that is a window of opportunity open for me because of the confluence of the Brown v. Board of Education decision that desegregated the public schools in Washington, D.C. when I was growing up, and the Soviet launch of the Sputnik satellite that riveted the nation's attention on science and math and educating people in those fields. But importantly, and the key factor for me was my parents who believed very strongly, as Dr. Du Bois did, in excellence and the power of education. And my mother, a social worker, I had all of her children reading before kindergarten. My father, who was not a high school graduate, he was a postal worker, was very mechanically and mathematically gifted. In fact, he was at Normandy and in World War II in a segregated Army unit. And when the amphibious landing vehicles lost their rudders, he fashioned a repair on the spot with a special splice for which he received the Bronze Star, and his method was taught throughout the theater in France. And thank you. And they taught me that there was nothing that anyone else could do that I couldn't. No place that anyone else could go that I couldn't and shouldn't. In fact, my father always said, aim for the stars so that you can reach the treetops and at least you'll get off the ground. He told me that all the time. And so we each come through our window in time. And if a pathway of opportunity opens and one has the nerve and the resilience to step onto it and stay on it, amazing things can happen. Amazing things happened for me. And that is why I'm here today. And I want to thank the Hutchins Center, Dr. Backow, my good friend Skip Gates, Dr. Gates, Mr. Hutchins, and all of Harvard. One of those honorary degrees actually is from Harvard. And I especially want to thank my family, my husband who's here today, my baby sister who's here today, and my leadership team, many of them from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Thank you for this signal honor.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tommy Shelby. I am the chair of the Department of African and African American Studies and also a professor of philosophy here at Harvard University. My task tonight is to read a passage from W.E.B. Du Bois, and that passage is taken from Dusk of Dawn, an essay toward an autobiography of a race concept. It is difficult to let others see the full psychological meaning of caste segregation. It is as though one, looking out from a dark cave inside an impending mountain, sees the world passing and speaks to it. Speaks courteously and persuasively, showing them how these entombed souls are hindered in their natural movement, expression, and development, and how their loosening from prison would be a matter not simply of courtesy, sympathy, and helping them, but an aid to all the world. One talks on evenly and logically in this way, but notices that the passing throng does not even turn its head, or if it does, glances curiously and walks on. It gradually penetrates the minds of the prisoners that the people passing do not hear, that some thick sheet of invisible but horribly tangible plate glass is between them and the world. They get excited, they talk louder, they gesticulate. Some of the passing world stop in curiosity. These gesticulations seem so pointless. They laugh and pass on. They still either do not hear at all or hear but dimly. And even what they hear, they do not understand. Then the people within may become hysterical. They may scream and hurl themselves against the barriers, hardly realizing in their bewilderment that they are screaming in a vacuum unheard, and that their antics may actually seem funny to those outside looking in. They may even, here and there, break through in blood and disfigurement, and find themselves faced by a horrified, implacable, and quite overwhelming mob of people frightened for their own very existence.
I was pretty sure that cheering wasn't for me. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Martha Tedeschi. I'm the director of the Harvard Art Museums, and I'm honored to be here to introduce Pamela Joyner. Speaking of her collection, the collection she's built, of abstract art by African American artists and artists of the global African diaspora, Pamela Joyner has said, "It's no less ambitious than an effort to reframe art history. First, to include more broadly those who have been overlooked, and for those with visibility, to steward and contextualize those careers." Reflecting on Pam Joyner's ambitious and vital undertaking, the curators of the current exhibition Solidary and Solitary, the exhibition which is currently drawn from the Joyner-Giuffrida collection and is currently traveling throughout the United States, stated this: "Collectors of Black art have long sought to preserve the facts about people and events that were being overlooked or discarded. The gesture is not small. Recognizing actors left out of dominant accounts does not simply repopulate these accounts, it changes the very form of history. This history also departs from a monolithic narrative of what it means to be Black." During my remarks, a selection of images from the Joyner-Giuffrida collection will be playing here for your enjoyment. These are dazzling works of art, mostly abstract in form, by artists ranging from Norman Lewis and Sam Gilliam to Kevin Beasley, Shanique Smith, Lynette Yaram-Boucher, among others. Pamela Joyner has moved boldly from a successful business career to become the most prominent collector and promoter of art in this country by African American modern masters such as Sam Gilliam and Norman Lewis, who often made art with little recognition or acknowledgement, while their white counterparts of the very same moment, Ellsworth Kelly and Robert Rauschenberg, for instance, enjoyed tremendous critical and commercial success. She began collecting art around 20 years ago, and with the support of her husband, Fred Jafrida, embarked on a mission to alter the legacy of racism in the art world. She took this work very seriously, hiring an art historian to study and document the art, and she's amassed more than 300 works by some 100 different artists at this point, with works dating from the 1940s right up to yesterday. In addition to masterworks by earlier talents such as Lewis and Gilliam, the collection also includes dynamic works in a wide variety of media and artistic approaches by current luminaries such as Kara Walker, Leonardo Drew, Lorna Simpson, Glenn Ligon, Melvin Edwards, and Mark Bradford, among so many others. As well, Pamela Joyner's passionate advocacy for the work of Black artists reaches far beyond her own collection. To give only a few examples, she's established a fund at Tate in London, where she is a trustee, to acquire African American art. She's created an artist in residence program in her family's vineyard in Sonoma County. And she's funding a new archive on African American artists at the Getty, where she was recently made a trustee. Evidence of her great commitment to the display, documentation, and legacy of Black artists resides in the encyclopedic volume, 4 Generations, the Joyner-Jafrida Collection of Abstract Art. I can recommend it. The current exhibition, Solidary and Solitary, is drawn from this astounding collection and has already been shown at a dozen museums in the United States. Pam is extremely generous with her collection, both through this touring exhibition, but also by individual loans to museums across the country. She has also supported Soul of a Nation, the critically acclaimed and first comprehensive exhibition of the Black masters that was commissioned by Tate and is currently on view and drawing capacity crowds at the Brooklyn Museum. A graduate of Dartmouth and Harvard, where she earned her MBA, and a supporter not only of the visual arts, she chaired the board of the San Francisco Ballet and served on the board of the New York City Ballet. In fact, it could be said that her early ballet lessons in her native Chicago, also my native Chicago, started her on her path. In a wonderful profile of Joyner in the New York Times a couple of years ago, we learned that she would visit the Art Institute of Chicago to see George Seurat's A Sunday on the Island of Grand Jatte after her ballet class. And in fact, it was at the Art Institute of Chicago, where I was deputy director a few years ago, that I first met Pam when she became a trustee of that institution as well. So from ballet class to the boardroom. Very proud of you. It was here that she developed what she modestly calls cultural literacy. And it is her mission to bring to light art that has, for so long, been in the dark, and to bring this type of literacy to those who have been too long shut out of it. For her extraordinary commitment to Black art as a profound expression of history and experience, the Hutchins Center recognizes Pamela Joyner with the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. Congratulations, Pamela.
I'm going to do all the hair.
you. I'm very deeply honored and humbled by this award, and I'd like to also congratulate all of my fellow awardees. It's a very memorable day for me. And I also would like to thank Harvard University, which set me on a path of having an interest in philanthropy. So I'm an unapologetic activist. And Florence, thank you for making it sound like that's okay. You know, living in Northern California, that is sort of the hotbed of innovation, one can dare to be different. And so what we're setting out to do is change the full arc of the full canon of art history. This endeavor requires the input and cooperation of so many individuals and institutions as well. But at the core of the endeavor is the artist. So I'll tell a little story about a room that is really an inspiration. I think about it often when I get up every morning to do the thing I do. For a number of years in the Brooklyn Museum, there's been an installation of Kehinde Wiley's work. And if you go there on a Saturday afternoon, well, first of all, let me just describe it. It's almost a temple. The work is on the ceiling and all four walls. And when you go in that room on a Saturday afternoon, you see something you don't see in most cultural institutions around this country. You see teenagers of color and young kids of color and families of color kind of lounging around taking in this spectacle. Why? Because people want to see themselves on the walls. So Harvard Business School set me on a course where I was lucky. I was able to do some things others weren't able to do, and so it's really been important to deploy those assets in a way that benefit others. Thank you very much.
My name is Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. I am, thank you. I am chair of the Department of History. And that's the department that conferred the PhD on W.E.B. Du Bois in 1895. And I also have the distinct honor of being a professor and member of the Department of African and African American Studies. The colleagues of Bryan Stevenson and his fellow social justice warriors speak of him in glowing, even spiritual terms. Barry Scheck, the co-founder of the Innocence Project, says Stevenson connects emotionally with people like no one else. Darren Walker, one of our Du Bois medalists from last year and the president of the Ford Foundation, describes Bryan Stevenson as one of the transformational leaders of his generation. He says of Stevenson, he is one of the great prophetic voices of our era. Anthony Romero, the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, says, most of us who do this kind of work are good. He's head and shoulders above us all. He's a genius. He's our Moses. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu referred to Bryan Stevenson as America's Nelson Mandela. a visionary lawyer, and a legal thinker, and author of the inspiring book about his journey in the law, Just Mercy. Bryan Stevenson has dedicated his life's work to protecting the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned. He is the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, which he founded in Montgomery, Alabama in 1994. And through EJI, Stevenson has won significant victories in the courts in eliminating excessive and unfair sentencing, exonerating innocent death row prisoners, confronting abuse of the incarcerated and the mentally ill, and aiding children prosecuted as adults. He has helped to move 125 condemned people off of death row. And he won the landmark Supreme Court decision ruling that mandatory life without parole sentences for children 17 and under is unconstitutional. Bryan Stevenson decided to enter the legal profession because he believed that the law had the broadest power over people's lives, and he recognized that the law had been deployed to deadly effects against Black communities throughout history, at least the history of the United States, not only during the time of slavery, but even afterward, when the brutality of slavery was translated into segregation laws and disfranchisement laws designed chiefly to disempower free African American citizens. And Stevenson has added to the legal work of the Equal Justice Initiative a new dimension, thus realizing that work in the courtroom could be aided through educating the broader public. And so in April of this year, he opened in Montgomery the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which honors the lives of thousands of African Americans lynched in acts of terror. And he opened the Legacy Museum, which is built on the site of a former slave warehouse. And the museum and memorial was described by the Washington Post. The writer Jonathan Capehart says, it is a, quote, visible manifestation of an argument Stevenson has been making eloquently for years. A clear and direct line can be drawn from slavery to lynching, to Jim Crow, to mass incarceration. Bryan Stevenson received an honorary degree from Harvard University in 2015, and after that ceremony, he went to the Harvard Law School for its commencement. He had graduated from the Harvard Law School 30 years earlier, and he addressed the freshly minted, awestruck lawyers, and I'm quoting him, "I hope that you know that you now have incredible opportunities to change the world. And I hope that you know you can change the world." So for his tireless efforts to create a different narrative about race, to acknowledge our past, to better shape our future, and to ensure that the rights and freedoms of all American citizens are protected and exercised, the Hutchins Center presents the W.E.B. Du Bois to my hero, Bryan Stevenson.
Thank you so much. I've been traveling all day and I wasn't able to get here at the start, but it is such an honor for me to be on this stage with these amazing human beings, some of whom I've admired my whole life. It's great to be back here at Harvard. This is very, very humbling. I do what I do by standing on the shoulders of people who did so much more with so much less. I started my education in a colored school. I grew up in a county where black kids couldn't go to the public schools. There were high schools. There were no high schools for black kids when my dad was a teenager, but because committed activists came into our community, they opened up doors for me. And because of that, I got to go to college, I got to go to law school, I've been able to do some things, and I'm just excited about what dedicated people can do if they put their minds to it. I am persuaded that we have to change things in this country. We need to change things in the world. There's a desperate need for more of us to get proximate to those who are poor and suffering, those who are excluded, those who are marginalized. I believe there's power in proximity, and if you're confused about what you can do, if you're not sure about how you can make a difference, get closer to people who are incarcerated or marginalized or excluded or abused or neglected, because in proximity to the poor, there's power. I'm also persuaded that we have to change some of the narratives out there. You know, we talk about policies and issues, but there are narratives underneath the issues. We've been governed for too long by the politics of fear and anger. There are people who want us to believe that we can only do what's in our personal interest, and they want us to be cowed by fear and anger. And I believe we have to reject that. There is a narrative underneath the history of racial inequality, and we've got to confront this narrative of racial difference that continues to burden us. It's in the air, it's like smog, it corrupts things. We've got to tell this country that we're a post-genocide society based on what happened to Native people when Europeans came to this continent. We've got to remind people that the great evil of American slavery wasn't involuntary servitude. It was this narrative of racial difference, this ideology of white supremacy, and the 13th Amendment doesn't deal with the ideology of white supremacy. It doesn't. And because of that, I've argued that the 13th Amendment didn't end slavery. Slavery just evolved. It turned into 100 years of terror and violence. And I think if we just recognize that the demographic geography of America was shaped by terrorism, the black people in Cleveland and Chicago and Detroit and Boston and Los Angeles and Oakland didn't go to those communities as immigrants looking for new economic opportunities. They went to those communities as refugees, exiles from terror in the American South. And so we have to recognize that that narrative of racial difference, which still creates a presumption of dangerousness and guilt, has to be confronted. And you can be a Harvard graduate, but if you're black or brown, you'll go places in this country where you're going to have to navigate a presumption of dangerousness and guilt, and we've got to change that narrative. And thirdly, you're so kind. But I'm also persuaded that we can't change things if we don't stay hopeful. That's my most urgent word to everybody. We've got to stay hopeful. Hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. You've got to hold on to your hope, because you're either hopeful or you're the problem. Hope is the thing that gets you to stand up when other people say sit down. Hope will make you speak when other people say be quiet. Your hope is your superpower. Hope is what brought us here. It's what got us to this place. And finally, I just want to say to all of you students out here, you've got to be willing to do uncomfortable things. You've got to be willing to do inconvenient things. We can't change the world if we're unwilling to do the uncomfortable and inconvenient. You students who are here, don't ever think that your grades are a measure of your capacity to change the world, because they're not. I want you to study hard, but I don't want anybody to think that your income is a measure of your capacity to change the world. It's not. It's not. I've learned one thing, and I'll end with this. I didn't get the pre-warning. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing up here, but let me... But let me just end with this. I'll just end with this. There's a different metric system that brought W.E.B. Du Bois into the power place that he occupied. There's a different metric system that allowed our foreparents to do the work that they did. There's a different metric system for many of the people on this stage. And for me, that metric system is reflected in one simple story. I'll give it to you. I was giving a talk in a church, and an older black man came into the church. He had a very serious look on his face. He was in a wheelchair. And he was sitting in the back of the church, and he was staring at me with this stern, almost angry look on his face. And I couldn't figure out, why is he looking at me so angrily? And I got through my talk. People were very nice and appropriate, but that older black man kept sitting at the back just staring. And when everybody else walked away, this older man wheeled himself to the front of the church. And when he got in front of me, he looked at me and he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I stood there. And then he asked me again, he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I mumbled something. I couldn't even remember what I was supposed to say. Then he asked me one last time. He said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And then that older man looked at me. He said, "I'm going to tell you what you're doing." He said, "You're beating the drum for justice. You keep beating the drum for justice." And I was so moved by what he said. I was also really relieved because I just didn't know what he was about to do. And this man grabbed me by my jacket and he pulled me into my wheelchair. He said, "Come here, come here, come here. I'm going to show you something." And that man turned his head. He said, "You see this cut I have behind my right ear?" He said, "I got that cut in Greene County, Alabama, 1963, trying to register people to vote." He turned his head. He said, "You see this scar I have down here at the bottom of my neck? Got that scar in Philadelphia, Mississippi, 1964, trying to register people to vote." He turned his head. He said, "You see this dark spot?" He said, "That's my bruise. Got my bruise in Birmingham, Alabama, 1965, trying to register people to vote." And then this older man looked at me. He said, "Come here, young man, I'm going to tell you something." He said, "People look at me, they think I'm some old man sitting in a wheelchair covered with cuts and bruises and scars." He said, "But I'm going to tell you something." He said, "These are not my cuts. These are not my bruises." He said, "These are not my scars." He said, "These are my medals of honor." So on behalf. And so today, for all of those who have been cut and bruised and scarred to make it possible for people like me to do what I do, I want to use this Medal of Honor to honor them, to reflect the work that they have done, and to thank all of you for inviting me to be part of this incredible community. Thank you all very much.
That's amazing. Wow, well, we're getting close and closer, that's for sure. I'm Marcelina Morgan, professor in African and African American Studies and the founding director of the Hip Hop Archive.
And my name is Brandon Terry. I'm assistant professor of African and African American Studies and of Social Studies. The present age has left unvarnished and unadorned the profound threat that a culture of cynicism and conformity poses to the grand ideals to which W.E.B. Du Bois devoted his life: truth and beauty, democracy and equality, dignity and self-respect. In these dark times which seek to supplant the intellectual with the thought leader, the artist with the influencer, and the organizer with the strategist, we return to Du Bois to cast light. As we seek the cultural and spiritual resources of our time to sustain us for the long siege ahead, Du Bois's example reminds us to honor and emulate those who, in the name of right, declare principle prior to profit and prior to popularity and act accordingly. As Dr. Du Bois writes in 1920's Darkwater, The doctrine of the divine right of majorities leads to almost humorous insistence on a dead level of mediocrity. It demands that all people be alike or that they be ostracized. At the same time, its greatest accusation against rebels is this same desire to be alike. The suffragette is accused of wanting to be a man. The socialist is accused of envy of the rich, and the black man is accused of wanting to be white. That any one of these should simply want to be himself is to the average worshiper of the majority inconceivable. And yet of all worlds, may the good Lord deliver us from a world where everybody looks like his neighbor and thinks like his neighbor and is like his neighbor.
Hip-hop owes a great deal to Du Bois. The rebellious spirit that Du Bois proudly and defiantly conveyed, the willingness to speak one's mind regardless of the consequences, is still alive and well in hip-hop music and hip-hop culture. That is not to say that keeping it real never goes wrong. Yeah, we study you here, okay? It is only to insist that this demand to express yourself, to speak the truth, no matter the consequence, has long been one of the deepest commitments of hip-hop culture. This is especially true when it comes to unmasking the criticizing racism in America. From Grandmaster Flash's The Message to Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, hip-hop at its best has lived up to Du Bois' ambition and souls to step within the veil, raising it that you may view faintly its deeper recesses. At the Hip Hop Archive and Research Institute, we work to continue Du Bois' commitments to art scholarship and social justice. A few years ago, the previous NAS fellow, Professor Chris Emden from Teachers College, brought a group of students from his hip-hop ed class in Harlem to visit Harvard and the Hip Hop Archive. They had recently learned about Du Bois in the veil of double consciousness while reading Souls of Black Folk. One student, Jabari Johnson, wrote a hip-hop song and performed what he called the New Veil. Now an artist releasing his first single rather, he considers Du Bois to be his boy. And repeatedly claims, and it's just an excerpt, yeah, I see myself through my own eyes. The rules don't apply, better improvise. See myself through my own eyes, bump the other guys, the rules don't apply, better improvise. I see myself, my own eyes, bump the other guys. Shout outs to my boy, Du Bois. Shout out to my boy, Du Bois, yeah. He made an issue known round the world. There's some mentalities we gotta destroy. Shout outs to my Du Bois. Shout outs to my Du Bois. He made an issue known round the world. There's some mentalities we gotta destroy. Shout out to my Du Bois. Thank you.
My name is Larry Bobo. I'm the Dean of Social Science in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Thank you. And I have the great honor of introducing Dave Chappelle. If we dig deep, we can most likely find a number of hidden connections among the community of W.E.B. Du Bois medalists that we've been building over the years. For instance, you will most likely recognize the man in the middle, a 2015 honoree who was also known for other accomplishments in his lifetime. The little boy to his left is a 2-year-old Dave Chappelle with his brother on the other side. Dave, Dave says he doesn't know how his mother arranged this meeting. She couldn't have known that many years later, one of her son's admiring colleagues would refer to his Muhammad Ali moment when he put principle above personal gain. A little more on that Ali moment later. Since that photo was taken in 1976, Dave Chappelle has accomplished quite a few things. Mostly, he's made us all laugh with him at this American culture that we live in, at its grievous blind spots, and even sometimes at ourselves. The Root said that his, quote, ability to combine racial insight, reason, and comedy makes him one of America's most celebrated living comedians. He has become America's unfiltered griot and teller of uncomfortable truths. Now, anyone who has taken AFAM 10, Introduction to African American Studies, when my colleague and dear friend Skip Gates and I have team taught the course, including one of Ken Chenault's sons, you will know that I refer to Dave Chappelle as Professor Chappelle. And I do so not because he has written weighty academic tomes. Instead, I do so because so many of his routines, skits, and performances make real, vivid, and of course, side-splittingly funny the complexities of race, of racial division, of blackness versus whiteness, and especially of what it is like to end up on the less than comfortable side of many such boundaries. Dave Chappelle grew up with a mother and father who were both, in fact, professors, dividing his time between Yellow Springs, Ohio, and a father teaching at Antioch, and Washington, D.C., with a mother teaching at the University of Maryland and other institutions. A split that would perhaps forge a distinctive double consciousness that informs both his comedy and his relationship with his multiple and diverse audiences. That Du Boisian double consciousness also informs so much of what's long been regarded as that distinctive black laughter. And I'm going to quote now from that great African-American author, Ralph Ellison, who I think characterized what this capacity, especially in connection to humor and creativity, is all about. It is not skin color which makes a Negro American, but cultural heritage as shaped by the American experience, the social and political predicament. To wit, to follow along Ellison's thought, it is fair, I think, that we could say in the humor of Dave Chappelle, now again quoting from Ellison, a special perspective on the national ideas, a tragicomic attitude toward the universe. It imposes the uneasy burden and occasional joy of a complex double vision, a fluid, ambivalent response to men and events which represents at its finest a profoundly civilized adjustment to the cost of being human in the modern world. Of course, the idea of the tragicomic circumstance being at the heart of humor itself is a very, very old notion, reaching back at least as far as Aristotle. In the tragedy, if you will, in the ironic juxtaposition of the incongruous or antithetical, we often find the heart of humor. Living in that space of tragicomic existence is all too often the special province of African American humor, a brand of humor of which Dave Chappelle is the undisputed master. For me, as I suspect for many of you, Chappelle's humor manages to combine several qualities that truly are hard to bring together in a fashion that is still funny. Yet he does it. He puts before us a keen grasp of the sociological and economic complexities of our times, but does it in a manner that captures, on a regular basis, a sense of all of our human vulnerability and flaws, that showcases his own playful risk-taking and daring, that communicates a powerfully felt sense of his own unflinching belief in the importance and basic dignity of each and every one of us as individuals. That is, just as his humor is skewering racism or bigoted stereotypes, in that same moment he manages to cast a light on the challenges and complexities of human existence that face all of us. In so doing, Chappelle manages to affirm bonds of common humanity, a humanity that ultimately knows no real bounds of color or race or ethnicity. That blending capacity of critique, of uplift, and of piercing humor is the ultimate in true genius. Consider a few of his more notable sketches. I suspect there may be some laughter here. Those of you who've been in AFAM 10 know that each and every year I showed the racial draft. It immediately captures the ultimate absurdity of racial divisions, but also showcases the tenacious power they still hold in our times. And they're just, you know, you have to love moments where, for example, the white team drafts Colin Powell. And the black team gives into the deal only if they also take Condoleezza Rice. As the narrator says, Condoleezza Rice given away by black people. And I shouldn't say that because she's a good friend and actually a good person. Or the Frontline episode on Clayton Bigsby, the blind black Klansman. Or better yet, the Time Haters, which I just watched again this afternoon. And I want to stop on the Time Haters briefly, just because at the end of it, you also capture the personal vulnerability that Chappelle brings to everything, because there's a point where they go back in time to a plantation with slaves, and the slaves ask, well, when are we going to be free? And Chappelle says, well, how about now? And he shoots the slave master. And they cut into the routine, and you see him, he's bent over completely, and he kind of says, it turns out the only people that think shooting somebody is funny are me and Neil. And, he says, but if I could do it with a slave master, I'd do it every day. You know? And it's that moment of kind of shame at embracing, and they just show the image over and over and over, this slave master being shot and falling over. Any event, there are other. The last thing I will mention, because it really did captivate us all, he was kind enough to get several of us seats to his performance with Jon Stewart this summer here in Boston on a just remarkable 2.5-hour comedy performance where they all kind of, he and Michael Che and Jon Stewart just riffed improv on stage, which was fantastic. But this idea of putting personal vulnerability on display, and I'm going to do this quickly because you really can't do this during the Du Bois Awards, one of the recurrent motifs was about watching the Chuck Berry sex tape. And and I have to say, I'm not going into any of the detail, but I will say, the beauty of this thing is that the whole point of doing it, and he came back to it like 5 times during the course of the episode, is to always come back to how disrespectful the tape was. And that it's important to respect the integrity of other human beings. And so at the same time, and yet he's revealing this indulgence in this, having watched this dreadful video. Okay. Okay. Anyway. Dave Chappelle has now had a long career in the public eye and is a figure of great fame. So much so that last year, the New York Times declared him an American folk hero. He's appeared in a number of films. Well, let me say this. The title of the article written by Kevin Powell was An American Folk Hero. There you go. He's appeared in a number of films in the 1990s, but it was in 2000 with the release of his stand-up film, Killing Them Softly, that he started on the path that we've all been on with him since. I personally loved him as Conspiracy Brother in 2002's Undercover Brother. Between 2003 and 2005, The Chappelle Show on Comedy Central was, it was the place to go for the most intelligent, most biting, and just the funniest comedy anyone was producing at the time. In 2005, in an unanticipated and subsequently highly analyzed move, Chappelle left his show and many millions of dollars, forcing us all to think about the nature of laughter in a society in which racism is sewn into our national fabric. Thankfully, he returned to stand-up in 2013 and appeared in Spike Lee's Chirac in 2015, and filmed a total of 4 comedy specials for Netflix. In 2017, he won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series for his appearance on Saturday Night Live. In 2018, he won both the Grammy for Best Comedy Album for The Age of Spin and Deep in the Heart of Texas, as well as another Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Variety Special for Dave Chappelle, Equanimity. My colleague in the Department of African and African American Studies, Glenn DiCarpio, who writes about race in comedy, says of artists like Chappelle, artists invite us to examine why stereotypes exist and to consider the power they have. We protest against them, but something is keeping them alive. The conjuring artist says, I'm going to bring these things fully alive in front of you and make them bigger and louder and get you to ask what it is that drives these stereotypes. Now, some people don't get the humor. That's a huge risk that artists who trade in stereotypes take. For the risks he's taken in his comedy and the risks he makes us take every time we laugh and shake our heads and say, he did not just say that. The Hutchins Center awards Dave Chappelle, Professor Dave Chappelle, the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal.
Man, I gotta tell you, when I was sitting here watching what all the other honorees have done with their lives, I started feeling like shit, like this is terrible. And then Bobo brought me up and started out good with that Ali picture, and then it just, whew. But that coloring book that was in the picture, I know the Ali's are here, that coloring book, my mother has it. And Champ, he signed it. You know, the greatest, he signed it, Muhammad Ali. And his sparring partner was there that day. And his sparring partner signed it, said the next heavyweight champion in the world, Larry Holmes. And he was. And 2-year-old Dave Chappelle colored all in that shit and just ruined the book. But I remember part of the book that I remember real vividly, because I asked my mother about it when I was a kid. There's a part where there's a picture of Ali throwing his Olympic gold medal into the Ohio River. That's why it's so weird for me being here. You know, both my parents were very brilliant. My dad went to Brown in 1955. That's right. He told me at the time he was one of 3 black students. He said one of the guys got accused of a rape that he probably didn't commit. And the other guy killed himself, and Dad said, and I left. And see, that's what makes us Chappelle's great. We know when to quit. We all just live to fight another day. I gotta say, I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very honored to be here with the other honorees. Really, I'm like very humbled by you all, the work that you do, and you all make me want to be better. Oh, yeah. And you know, I was gonna stop doing stand-up for a while because 4 comedy specials in a year is like, that's a lot, you know. But you know, shout out to my colleagues in comedy. I just want to say that in a way, this for me belongs to my mother primarily, who was an African American studies professor, and a lot of the content that I say, she raised me well. I'm not an uninformed person. But also, you know, my colleagues in comedy, like comedians have been getting beat up pretty bad recently, and we're somehow nowadays expected to speak with the precision of attorneys or politicians. We are not. I always think of James Baldwin. You know, James Baldwin was one of my favorite writers because he managed to tell white people what they feel like to be around. So I ain't gonna hang up my gloves yet. I think I got one more special in me. So to quote Baldwin, God gave Noah the rainbow sign. It's no more water, it's the fire next time. Thank you very much.
Oh, what a blessing to be here tonight. There is a sweet spirit in this place. Has much to do with the leadership. Has much to do with those who are trying to provide the vision, the examples of courage. I begin here at Harvard. I want to say a wonderful word for our new captain, our dear president, Larry Bacow, and his wife Adele, They go together. They go together. They go together. Brother Skip Gates, he's been at it now for 40 years. He is what you call an unadulterated black genius, fundamentally invested in the quest for truth to fight the vicious legacy of white supremacy with a smile. That's Skip. That's Skip. And then we got Brother Glenn. We got our vanilla brother who puts his money where his mouth is. But I want to congratulate those who brought all of these precious young brothers and sisters of all colors. You are the center. There's a question raised by the great Lorraine Hansberry in Raising in the Sun, where Mama says, and there's never been a character on the stage full of more love than Mama. And she says, how do you pass on the best of the great tradition to the younger generation? Because when you mention the word W.E.B. Du Bois, his name, you ought to shake, you ought to shiver. The greatest of all public intellectuals in the history of the American empire. He's got some serious competition with John Dewey and Edmund Wilson and Lionel Trilling and Susan Sontag and Reinhold Niebuhr. But give me W.E.B. Du Bois. But how do you pass it on? Even Du Bois was wrong about some things. But he like our younger brother, like each and every one of these exemplars. And keep in mind, young folk, these are not glitzy celebrities, they're exemplars of excellence. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. This is not about superficial spectacle. This is about moral substance and a spiritual witness. They come from a people, a black people, who for 400 years were terrorized and refused to terrorize back. At our best, we taught the world something about freedom. These are they in this moment come from those black people who've been traumatized for 400 years, and at our best, we've taught the world something about healing. We just lost one of the greatest healers of them all, Aretha Franklin herself. And most importantly, we come from a people who have been hated chronically, institutionally, systemically for 400 years and taught the world so much about love and how to love. And you see, when you look at my brother Colin, the first thing you ought to see is the love in him. Because in order to sacrifice what he had to sacrifice, he had to have John Coltrane like Love Supreme all shot through him. And it's the love of truth, Harvard Veritas, but the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. And there is no veritas without caritas, which is love. And what has been overlooked in this brother's example, not just he's one of the finest athletes of his generation coming out of Pittman High School of Turlock, California, drafted by the Chicago Cubs for baseball, a great basketball all-star player, but decided to go play football at the University of Nevada, Reno with my namesake, Cornel West, who was on the same team just a few years before you were. 10,000 yards in passing, 4,000 yards in rushing. So it was exemplified excellence, but he was not simply content with being successful. He wanted to be great. And yes, somewhere I read, he or she is greatest among you will be your servant. And if you look on the tattoos on his body, his well-maintained body, you look on the left and you're going to see Psalms 18:39. Read it tonight in your Bible, in your Hebrew scripture. What does it talk about? It talks about arming oneself for strength in a struggle. Then the other section of his body is Psalm 27:3. What does 27:3 says? It says, I will not be fearful in the midst of struggle. I will be confident in the midst of war. That's the tradition we're talking about. Yes, we thank God for our precious Jewish brothers and sisters writing that scripture saying to be human is to spread hesed, steadfast love and loving kindness to the vulnerable, the fatherless, the motherless, those who are catching hell. Yes, those not treated right by the police. Yes, those who locked in unemployment and underemployment. Those who this brother kneeled down, he first sat down, then he kneeled down in order to stand up. And he stood up for justice. He stood up for freedom. He stood up for righteousness. And when our dear sister Florence talks about protest, let's be clear about the Latin etymology of that word. Because people misconstruing his protest. Protest comes from protestare. And testare means stand, and means stand for something. He's not just standing against something, he's standing for something. And it's more than his ego. Oh, young folk, please, please take seriously the example, not simply of what you hear on television, but the love, because justice is what love looks like in public, just like that tenderness is what love feels like in private. That's what we have in this brother Colin. And our dear sister Kalia and brother Jacob, who's been kind enough to take classes with me, tied to Muhammad Ali. I was here when Muhammad Ali spoke in 1971 on the first row. We don't have anybody who comes close to the Muhammad Ali of this generation in athletics, to give up millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. Brother Dave gave up at least 50. This brother must have given up 75 and counting. But it's not the number, it's the integrity rather than the cupidity. It's the integrity rather than the popularity. That is what has sustained black people, trying to ensure that the highest levels of courage and love and hope can be exemplified. And when we look at the present, we still losing. Let's just be honest about it. We still losing, but it's a relative loss because we got bounced back. And we bouncing back in part because of this, brother. We don't need to get obsessed in the gutter with the gangster in the White House. No, we don't need to get obsessed with him. And I say that in the spirit of charitable Christian hatred. That's right. And charitable Christian hatred means that you hate the sin and you try to love the sinner. That you loathe the injustice, but you try to keep track of the humanity of the gangster, because there's a gangster inside each and every one of us. That's what Brother Colin represents for the younger generation. What Alfred and Simpson called the real thing. He ain't no copy. He's no simulacra. He's no semblance. He's the real thing because his love is real. It's got something to do with Rick and Teresa and his blessed parents. You can see their love shot through him. It's got something to do with his coaches who said, no matter what color you are, the love always cuts deeper. But you be true to yourself. You do what's right. You do what's just. You do what's moral and come to terms with the consequences. It's no accident he also has on his body, glory to God, sent from heaven, Jesus Christ. They don't talk about this brother as a prophetic Christian in a decadent, bleak moment. That's also what he is. Let's just be real. What keeps him going? How does he sustain himself? The same tradition that keeps many of us going. And that's why I'm blessed to present to you the one, the only, the magnificent, the marvelous, the love warrior of his generation in sports, Colin Kaepernick.
You may all remain standing. Once again, on behalf of this university, our president, Larry Backow, Mr. Glenn Hutchins, Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., we celebrate the honor, the beauty, the excellence of these 2018 Du Bois Medal winners. My friends, life is short, and time is filled with swift transition. We don't have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel this thing called life with us. So as you leave this place, remember, be swift to love. Make haste to be kind. Be quick to compliment and slow to criticize. And if you do so constructively. Love yourself. For loving yourself is a precondition for loving your neighbor. Speak the truth. Stand in truth or kneel in truth. For it's the truth that will set us free. And despite the enormity and ubiquity of suffering that's taking place in this world right now, we don't have time to play dream adrift. So therefore, all we can do is to pursue justice today, to love mercy in this moment. And as Florence Ladd told us, to protest right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the 2018 recipients of the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal, Harvard University. Give it up for the Kumba Singer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. God bless you, and good evening.